They came for us in the night. When I got home from work, I immediately knew that something was wrong. My German Shepherd Sarah would always greet me happily at the front door, her tail wagging. She wasn't waiting for me when I opened the front door, and as I stepped inside, I heard what sounded like static coming from the back of the house. I put my bag down on the table, looking around for Sarah, unable to find her. I followed the sound of the noise down the hallway, back to my bedroom, and discovered it was coming from an old radio that I would keep turned on for Sarah when I went away to work. She had terrible separation anxiety, and listening to the radio when I was away seemed to be helping her nervous fits when I had to leave the house. I frowned when I got to the radio, sure that I had left it on an active station. The radio, which was one of those old wooden Utique units, seemed to be in perfect operating condition, but no matter what station I turned the dial to, I only received static. Somewhere overhead, thunder rumbled loudly, and I discovered that the house felt suddenly too big and quiet, and that I needed to locate my dog. "Sarah," I called out, stepping from my bedroom and back into the living room. "Let's go outside." Silence was my only reply from the house. I began to feel the cold edges of fear creeping into my chest, and fought to stay calm. There was no way she could have gotten outside. I had made sure all of the windows were properly locked after the last time she got out. Sarah and I lived in the house that my parents built after they got married. My father was retired Air Force and my mother was an accountant. Both had successful careers and their marriage produced 4 children, of which I am the youngest. When they died, I was the only sibling not settled into a steady career or with a family of my own, so it made sense for the house to go to me. Part of me felt jealous that they had their own lives to look forward to, while all I had was an empty house and my dog. They had had so much more time with our parents and grandparents, it didn't seem fair. These were the bitter thoughts that I had in my darker moments, consumed by my inability to fit in and find meaningful relationships with friends or partners. The dog was all I had, and the dog was enough. When I went into the kitchen and turned the lights on was when I found her. She was standing at the bay window, staring out at the darkness beyond the glass. "Sweet girl, what are you doing?" I asked as I approached her. Her tail wagged for a moment, and she resumed her vigil at the windows. "There's nothing out there, sweetheart." But I wasn't sure if I was saying this for her benefit or for mine. We lived alone out here, on the farm that my parents had built in the latter years of their retirement. The farm went mostly unused now, only a few horses and cattle remained, isolated on separate pastures on the estate. Our closest neighbor was my sister, who lived in the house that she had inherited from my grandmother after her death many years ago. Her and her husband had just celebrated the birth of their 3rd child a few months ago, and had even saved up enough money to have a pool installed, which thrilled their children. I remember cynically thinking, is this what normal people look like? Celebrating such mundanity? Is this all there is to life? The sun had long since gone down, and staring out through the glass of the windows, I saw nothing of particular interest in the fields, and wondered if the storm had gotten to Sarah. I had read once that some dogs were frightened of thunderstorms, though Sarah had never before displayed fear or apprehension about them. The area of the country we lived in, the Deep South, was a hot spot for bad weather, which both of us had seen our fair share of. Could the weather really be what she was acting strangely about? I grabbed her leash from the kitchen counter and told her again that we were going outside, which seemed to break the spell the window had had over her. She bounded up to me, tail wagging wildly, and gave me the expected amount of kisses required when seeing me for the first time after I had been gone. We stepped outside into the humid southern night, serenaded by the sounds of the cicadas and crickets, and walked across the carport and into the tall grass beyond the edge of the yard. I remembered when we were younger, how this yard had once been fenced in, and we had spent our childhood running and playing in its confines. That was years ago, before the storm had come and blown it away, just like it had blown away all of our lives. It began to lightly rain just as Sarah had found a spot that was to her liking, and I wished that I remembered the thunder and the rain it would bring with it, and had grabbed a jacket on the way out. I casually glanced to the massive forest on the outskirts of the estate, and thought that I had seen movement briefly. Staring out at the dark, I saw nothing further and decided that it was a trick of the light, and that my eyes had been deceiving me. Suddenly, the power went out in the house behind me. The pale illumination from the lights of the kitchen suddenly cut off, throwing us in total darkness. I swore loudly as I turned around to look at the house, noticing that it wasn't just our house that had lost power, but all of our neighbors as well. The entire countryside, as far as I could see in the distance, was dark. All of the houses had seemingly lost power at the exact same time. Sarah growled behind me, a deep rumbling noise that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up straight. As I turned around, careful not to get caught up in the leash, I quickly realized why Sarah had growled. Standing a few feet in the distance, half obscured by the tall grass, was a slender bipedal creature of vaguely humanoid proportions. That wasn't what I noticed first, however, as my eyes were drawn to a pair of golden eyes, the glow of which became the only light visible in the field. The rain increased in its intensity. Thick, heavy sheets began to come down, soaking me thoroughly to the bone. The thing beyond the grass took a step towards us, and Sarah lunged forward, snapping and growling at it. The leash pulled taut, and I wrapped it twice around my arm, bringing her closer towards my body. "Do not be afraid," a female voice called out, and I glanced at its face to see movement from its lips, but found none. "I did not come here to harm you." The voice was calm and low, but sounded out louder than the sound of the rain and the thunder of the storm, which was in full effect now. "What are you, and what do you want?" I yelled out, the fear in my voice clear as could be. "Stay back," I warned as the creature took a few more steps towards us, and Sarah growled out a similar warning. "It is you that called me here, James, and it is you that I have come for." I was certain this time that the creature's mouth hadn't moved, yet I heard the words all the same. "I am speaking to you now in your mind, James. There is nothing to be afraid of." "How do you know my name?" "I know everything there is to know about you, James. I know the things that you want, the things you desire. Your heart called out to us, and I have answered." Now it was only a few feet away, and as my eyes began to adjust to the darkness, I could make out more of its features. It was tall, much taller than myself. If I had to estimate it, I would put it at 7 feet tall. Its limbs were dark black and almost seemed to blend in with the darkness of the night. Its face was framed by 2 twisting black horns that protruded and curled back from its temples. The way the creature walked and held itself up gave me the impression of femininity, but I had no reference in mind to compare this thing to. "You don't know me at all. Stay back," I said, glancing around for a way out of the situation. The reality of my conversation with this thing from a nightmare began to sink in, and the panic and fear began to take over. I had to get away. Sarah and I had to escape. We weren't safe here. "There's no escape, James." Lightning flashed across the night sky, and I saw that she was right. There were several other golden eyes shining out at me from the darkness, their eyes burning with fierce intensity, forming a large circle around us in the field. We were surrounded. Several things happened in rapid succession after that realization. Sarah managed to slip her collar and ran at the creature with the speed and ferocity that is born of fear and the need for self-preservation. I screamed out to stop her, but lightning and thunder boomed out and drowned my voice. The creature held out her hand, the only movement it had made besides walking towards us, and Sarah, inches away from attacking it, was lifted off the ground and thrown several feet through the air, sliding through the mud and coming to an eventual stop on the ground. "Sarah!" I called out to her, forgetting the situation with the strange creatures, and ran over to her crumpled body on the ground. She wasn't moving, and her breath came out in short, shallow gasps. Some of her paws were sticking out at irregular angles, and she had broken several teeth in the altercation. Blood and mud stuck to her fur, and I could feel my heart breaking, an almost literal physical pain. Sarah was all that I had in this world. "No, no, no," I whispered, stroking her soft ears and wiping some of the mud off of her muzzle. I looked up at the female creature, blinking rainwater out of my eyes. The circle was beginning to close, and the golden-eyed figures were beginning to take shape as they got closer to us. I could see that they comprised many different colors and heights, but there were only two main body types, slender and muscular. "We have a long night ahead of us, James. It's time that we got started." She walked up next to us as the others began to close in, and I closed my eyes in fear and wished that Sarah and I could wake up from this nightmare. "Prepare yourself for dissolution." I felt a strange lifting feeling, almost as if the ground had been lifted out from under my feet, and my vision became black as I lost consciousness. I opened my eyes, greeted by darkness, and I had a moment of relief, thinking that it was all a terrible dream. It was the smell of blood and the screams that shattered this brief moment of happiness, though. I was in some sort of medical room, dimly lit by several lanterns that were hanging from the ceiling, their light provided by fluttering red insects. Their bioluminescence, alien and beautiful, was unlike anything I had seen before. The air in the chamber was humid and hot, and had an earthy musk that made me gag. My clothing had been removed, and both of my arms were outstretched and locked into place. I was suspended off the ground against the wall, which was made of a fleshy, pulsing, organic material. The materials that comprised the environment seemed to be alive and moving of their own accord. The walls were textured in dark brown and red bumps and ridges, and were covered in a thin layer of slime and viscera. I could feel the wall behind me steadily pulsing, and a warm, viscous liquid had spread down my body where I made contact with it. I tried to tell my limbs to fight back and struggle, but they failed to respond, and I felt a general lethargy seep into my bones. I fought the urge to sleep and got a better look at my surroundings, which was when I saw that I wasn't alone. There was another man in the room with me who was also strapped down naked against the wall. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have known him from. My head was still foggy from everything that had happened. Sarah was facing away from me on a black table, polished and clean, next to him. Several tools, their designs and utility unfamiliar to me, sat next to her on the table. Their surface, as smooth and black as the table, reflected the red light of the lanterns, further adding to the strangeness of the situation. My heart beat a little faster when I saw her, hoping she was okay. Against the wall opposite Sarah and the man was a glass tank filled to the brim with dark water. Something in the tank bumped against the glass, but it was too dark in the room for me to make out any details. The other man was whimpering and praying to himself, saying the words of the Lord's Prayer over and over again. I could see deep cuts all over his body, and his face and limbs were drenched in blood. "Hey, where are we? How did we get here?" I called out to him. The man looked up at me, shaken from his prayers. "I didn't know you were still alive," he said. "You were here when I woke up. I don't remember much, only that they came for us in the night. The power went out, and I went to go check the fuse box, and that was when—" "Yeah, same thing happened to us," I said, after he trailed off, lost in his own thoughts. "Do you think we can get out of here and escape? I can't move my arms. It's like they're asleep or something. They won't respond." "There's no getting out of here," the man said, getting louder with each word. His eyes were wild with fear and seemed sunken into his face, giving him a crazed, hollow look. "We've died and gone to hell. Only God can save us now." As I opened my mouth to tell him to quiet down, one of the walls opened up, forming a circular hole, and two of the creatures walked into the room, their golden eyes flashing over both of us. One of them was the female from before, and the other appeared to be male, tall and well-built, and his flesh was dark gray in appearance. It also had horns, though his were shaped and colored differently than the female's were. "There will be no escaping from here, Brian Towler, and your God can't save you now." A deep masculine voice sounded in my head. The female walked over to me, and the man was approached by the male, who peered down at him. "Brian Towler," I thought. "Wait, I know him." "That's correct, James. This is the same Brian Towler that your sister met at church, whom she has been letting watch over her children when they are out of town. Yes, It's all coming back to you, isn't it? And it was. Brian and his wife Melinda had watched over my nephews and nieces when my sister and her husband had gone out on dates or on vacation. I had been both relieved and somewhat annoyed that neither of them had asked me to watch over their kids for them. But that wasn't all that he had done. Brian and Melinda had also watched over Sarah for me a few times when I had been forced to go out of town for work trips. It hadn't been my choice the first time, as I was caught off guard by the suddenness of the work trip, but they had come through for me in the end, and I was appreciative for their willingness to take Sarah in, despite her being strangely shy and withdrawn around the pair. Brian and Melinda were good people. What were they doing wrapped up in all of this? I looked over at Brian, though much of his body was shielded from sight by the large frame of the male creature, and saw him shaking his head vigorously, his eyes closed. Are they good people, though, James? Are you a good person? The female said, speaking in my mind. They are broken in ways that my kinsman here finds particularly appetizing. He savors their forbidden proclivities, delights in their darkest desires, not in a way that is unlike how I have bonded with you. We're not bonded, you crazy bitch. We're nothing alike, I said, summoning what little courage and conviction I had left. What she said had surprised me, as I had never considered the character of the Towlers very seriously. My sister had had no complaints, and as far as I knew, the children hadn't either. But was there something more to them, or was the creature misleading me? Maybe there was something to Sarah's odd behavior around them. We are very alike, James, whether you would admit it or not. I sought you out, much like how Brian Towler was sought out. Your pain and grief and loneliness are delicious to me. They are the things that I feed upon and take pleasure in. You've spent your whole life angry about being left out, angry at your family for not including you in their lives, angry at the world for passing you by. You've been searching for meaning and purpose in a family who would accept you for who you are, and I am here to answer that call. I didn't want to admit it, but a lot of what she said felt true to me. I could be in a room full of people and find a way to divide myself from them. I was particularly skilled at making enemies wherever I went, but not particularly good at making friends. The aching loneliness and desire to be with people who would accept me were all things that I had felt throughout my life. Even when surrounded by my own family, I would feel this loneliness. Work and sleep, work and sleep, work and sleep. That was all that life had become for me. I believe you've played with your food long enough, haven't you? The female called out, and this time I knew she wasn't just speaking to me. The golden-eyed male bent itself down to the restrained Brian Towler and began to feed. I closed my eyes tight against what little I could see from behind his large frame, but I heard the sound of tearing flesh and bones cracking. Brian began screaming in pain, and in horror, and for his life, but the screams would eventually die down to a faint gurgle. The only thing I could hear now was the sound of blood splattering against the floor. Tears that I didn't know I had cried fell down my face, clearing away tracks of grime and mud that had accumulated during this nightmare. Shh, James. We will be together soon. I would tell you my name, but your human tongue would not be able to pronounce it, she said to me, wiping away my tears in a way that I found disturbingly affectionate. I told you no harm would come to you. Your fate will be different than his. Everything will become clear soon, and you will know your place in this world. The female stepped away from me, her hand trailing down my chest as she walked over to the glass tank, and the activity inside reached a peak, seemingly reacting to her presence. The water began sloshing around violently and began to spill over the top of the tank. I could see slithering shapes pressed up against the glass of the tank, their bodies and tails crashing against the glass as they thrashed around. The female reached into the tank and pulled what looked like an eel out of the water. It was several inches long, dark red in color, and was covered in black spines all down its body. The eel began to thrash in her hand, but she stroked its back, whispered something to it, and it became docile and immobile in her palm. She began to walk over to me, eel in hand, and I had a terribly uneasy feeling about what was about to happen. This will be the end of your life as you know it, James. You will shed your human skin and be one with me and our kind. She had reached me and had placed the eel up towards my face. I attempted to twist my head away from it, but the lethargy that had set in had reached my upper body, and I was only able to move my head a few inches away. The walls in this room secrete a paralyzing toxin, which helps us subdue our prey. Your body will not feel the pain, but your mind will know and will remember, she said, opening my mouth gently with her fingers. I could no longer speak, my mouth and tongue frozen in place. She caressed my forehead, wiping the sweat from my brow, and moved the eel closer to my mouth. My eyes opened wide in horror when I realized what she was going to do, and the last thing that I saw was those two golden eyes burned into my consciousness. We sat on the topmost branches of the oak tree, Sarah, the female, and myself. She had revealed to us the nature of her kind following our rebirth at the hands of the eels, and we had returned to this place so that I could taste the closure I desperately needed. I was driven back to this place, feeling the calling that my mate had mentioned to me. The loneliness and pain that I felt deep within my heart had called her to me, our minds and souls linking across the vast chasm of time and space, and now my rage and anger and frustration would drive me to them. My old life, my old family. Their end would be my beginning. We looked down from our perch into the window, 6 golden eyes reflected in the glass, and my mate, who embodied both beauty and terror incarnate, reached out with her mind and touched that of the feeble thing sleeping in the room. I felt its fear through my connection with her, raw and palpable, its taste intoxicating to me. I looked over at my mate, growling deep in my chest as I traced the edges of her feminine form with my eyes, anticipating the thought of our imminent coupling. The rain continued to come down, with more intensity than before, and it showed no signs of slowing down. Lightning flashed across the night sky and illuminated the numerous children's toys strewn haphazardly across the patio. The recently built pool overflowed with water, the winds of the storm spinning a lone floaty wildly around the edges of the concrete structure. The power was still out, and I knew now that the power outage and the static on the radio was no accident or coincidence, but was by design. From the room below us, a young child cried out in the night, scared not only of the lightning and the thunder produced by the storm, but also by the swirling darkness of the nightmare that was still fresh in her mind. She saw golden eyes, blinding in their intensity, all-knowing and all-seeing, probing and tearing at her mind. Her mother came into the room shortly after hearing the cries and attempted to comfort her. "Mommy, there's a monster outside my window," the child told the mother. "It felt so real. No matter where I tried to hide in my dream, they were always there. They could always see me." The mother laughed gently and told the child that it was just a bad dream. The mother told her that the storm would pass soon and that she should go back to bed. The child was comforted by this, and the mother stayed in the room until her child had fallen back to sleep. I looked over at Sarah, our eyes meeting, our minds in unison. Our connection in my past life had carried over into this new one, something my mate had told us was a rare occurrence amongst our kind. Sarah licked her lips, her long dark tongue passing over her multiple rows of fangs, relishing in what was to come. I could practically taste the blood and sinew as well, and knew that I wouldn't have long to wait until I could gorge myself upon their flesh. I would tear my old life apart, limb from limb, and my rebirth would be complete. We are here, in your present and in your past, and we are coming for you, hungry and patient. Thanks for listening, guys. This is the second time that I re-recorded this story. I ended up adding in a few details. I had to re-edit the end of the story because I wasn't happy with the first time how it had turned out. But I'm happy with it now. This is, of course, the first episode in my series Shattered Dreams, where I read short horror stories that I've written. I am a big fan of the nosleep community on Reddit, and I'm pretty sure that's where the written text is going to be posted. I'm going to make No Sleep my home and see if I can become a part of the great community there. So inevitably, when I end up posting them, I will make sure to include a link in the description so you can go check it out if you want, because I know some people would prefer to read a story instead of listening to it. But with this story, that concludes my first content cycle. I'm pretty happy with how this has all turned out. I feel like I've gotten so much better with each video that I've done. The audio is so much better. I feel more confident in what I'm saying. I'm really happy with where the channel's growing. I've been really impressed with the reaction. I know all YouTube channels start small, and I knew that would be what I could expect, but I've been pretty surprised with how well things have been going. But I just wanted to say thanks. This has been the first cycle of my content. I'm already working on the next go around, so stay tuned for that. And if you're new and you like the video, feel free to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed your visit to the Midnight Vigil. This is, after all, the channel where the stars are always right and there really is a monster hiding under your bed. Anyways, guys, have a good night. I will see you next time.